And now Samuel Adams and the boys in New York and Patrick Henry in Virginia, they are all beginning to utter and issue one call for this Stamp Act, their main level of protest against the Stamp Act, and that is no taxation without representation. That is the mantra of the resistance to the Stamp Act. They say we do not have representatives in Parliament, therefore Parliament cannot pass laws to tax us. Parliament responds, yes, you have representation in Parliament. It's called virtual representation. We do have people that take up your cause. We do consider your needs before voting on them. The Americans say BS to that. There is no such thing as virtual representation. Finally, at long last, after 1 year, Parliament repeals the Stamp Act and say, our mistake, we probably should have talked to you first. However, they then pass the Declaratory Act, and they say that the right of Parliament is undeniable in its ability to legislate for the colonies. The colonies say, whatever, but we're not following along with that. You can say whatever you want, but you do not have primacy over us. And so this raises fundamental questions about the relationship of the colonies and the colonial assemblies to Parliament. Two important notes. One, the colonies show signs of being unified. Two, salutary neglect, that long 160-year arrangement in which the colonies were allowed to govern themselves as long as they kept up a stream of finished goods, has now come to an end. Parliament now takes a vested interest in the colonial situation. Now we turn our attention to the Stamp Act crisis, which is the result of the first direct tax on the colonies, the colonial response to it, and then finally the repeal of the Stamp Act. And here you see a artist's characterization of the fatal stamp. Oh, the fatal stamp. In the year 1765, the British war debt was £129,586,789. Translated into American dollars at the time, it was about $600 million. And now you do the rate of inflation to today, and you'll see that that was a very big war debt. And Parliament needed to do something about the war debt, and so they pass the Stamp Act of 1765, because the war debt was getting in the way of pressing social issues. When you are spending money paying the debt, you're not spending money on schools, on roads, on infrastructure, on public works. You're spending it on your debt. And so Parliament passes the Stamp Act of 1765, which calls for an official stamp and thus a fee on all legal documents, wills and contracts, newspapers, pamphlets. They even tax playing cards, because this is very much what you call a sin tax in some ways. That is, you're taxing vice. Gambling was seen to be a vice, and why should gamblers get away with it when everybody else is being taxed as well? Constitutionally, the Stamp Act was very sound. You bought a stamp, you put it on the paper, the law was passed through all the proper procedures and protocols of the British Parliament. Politically, it was one of the most foolish things the British government ever did, because they passed it without even once talking to any of the colonial governments. They did not bring them in on the deliberations. They did not bring them in to find out what the colonial mood was. And there you see the result of a very overly centralized and out-of-touch government. There you see the little stamps that you would go. You would have to purchase a stamp in order to file it in a court, to publish it, to purchase it from a store or whatever. And stamp agents were very quickly lining up to buy stamps so that they could sell them off and make a profit. The colonial response was, shall we say, typical. Massachusetts and New England are the hotbeds of dissent. They are somewhat of the rambunctious siblings of the American colonists.
They've started what is
they are
essentially
led, in large part, by Samuel Adams. Samuel Adams is wrongly credited with being a brewer. He did not brew beer.
Definitely
he
not
malted
a place of political
the
moderation.
grain that was
New
used
York
in
legislature
brewing beer.
calls a
Okay?
Stamp Act.
Samuel
Congress
Adams is an agitator.
And
He's a
there,
street
after a
tough.
great deal of debate,
He's the
and
leader of the
fiery
protest
speeches,
movement.
They passed resolutions.
Okay, many
protesting
people
the
would
Stamp
say that
Act.
he
Now,
would
for
probably have
Virginia
fit
and
in
Massachusetts,
very well
for
with
New York and
the
Massachusetts
Antifa movement of something like
to
that.
protest the Stamp
His
Act.
group, his
Many
organization, were
British
called the
officials
Sons of Liberty.
Well,
What a
typical.
great name
They
for
said
a
this
group.
is what they do.
And they were
But when
basically
Virginia now
mob
begins
leaders.
to debate
They were
it
tough
in the
guys.
House of Burgesses, the
they were
Brits
from
take
Boston,
note
after
because
all.
Virginia is the oldest of
The
all
Sons
the
of Liberty
colonies,
engaged
and Virginia
with
is the most,
Adams's,
shall we say,
help
gentlemanly and
in
civilized.
what is called mob
and the Burgesses
violence.
start debating
Now, mob
about
violence,
it, and
when
they
you
debate
think about
it,
mob
and they
violence, you
debate
think about
it
some
until
out
at
of control
last,
protest
one
on the
young
streets.
member of the House of Burgesses,
Mob violence
who
in
is
the colonies
29
was
years
never
old,
random.
leaps up
didn't
and
just
begins to
grow out of
excoriate the
nothing. It wasn't
Burgesses for
organic.
not
It
doing
was very
enough
closely
to
controlled
denounce the
and
Stamp
closely
Act.
stoked.
And then he
It
goes
had an
into a
object,
long invective
an
about how
objective,
Parliament and the King
and it
have been
once it-
really going
it reached
against
that
the best
object
interest
and
of the
fulfilled that
colonists, and that
objective,
the people of
dispersed.
Virginia deserve better than what they're getting out
Case
of
in
London.
point, the
That young
Macintosh
man's
riot.
name was
Ebenezer
Patrick Henry,
McIntosh
you can see
was
there in the
a
picture.
lower middle
After
to lower
he
class
finished
man
speaking,
who
one of the
was
Burgesses
essentially
said to
assaulted for
Henry,
not
"Sir,
showing the
what you are
proper
talking
deference to
is
one of his
treason."
social betters.
And Henry retorts very
This, of
quickly,
course,
"Well,
gives
this
Adams
be
and the
treason.
Sons of Liberty
Let us
a
make the
cause
most of
celeb
it."
to go after the Stamp Act
And so with
official,
Virginia
Andrew
now
Oliver,
passing
and they
resolutions
hang him
against the
in
Stamp
effigy.
Act.
Now, what does it
General
mean to be hung in
resistance
effigy? Andrew
begins.
Oliver
Another
himself was
boycott
not hung from a
starts.
tree.
On November
Instead,
the 1st,
he was dragged to the
1765,
tree
all
where he got to business in
see
any
a
item pertaining
straw-filled
to
dummy
or
of
meeting a stamp
himself,
ceases.
or trying to resemble himself.
Riots
hung
break
up
out
there,
in New York
where
City.
the crowd would either beat
200
it up
Boston
or they
merchants
would,
who
light it
really
on fire, with
did
the
not
understanding that
it
you
was
would
not
be
in their
next.
economic interest to join this boycott.
As if that wasn't enough,
Join
the
the
mob
boycott.
then goes and attacks
the New York
the
Assembly,
Attorney
as if to
General's
sort
house,
of
Thomas
defy
Hutchinson.
the British, say,
burn the house
we
down.
are not going to
Hutchinson and his
comply with
family
the
are
Quartering
just
Act.
barely
We're
able
not
to
going to
get
open
out,
up
and
our homes so
Hutchinson
that
is
British
very
soldiers will have a
pro-British.
place to stay.
Remember our friend
because
Hutchinson
back
from the
in this
Albany
day, there is no
Union
Third
during
Amendment
the
to the
early part of
Constitution,
the French
and
and Indian
because
War.
there is no
But
Constitution,
he is a
and
die-in-the-wool
we're expected
Tory.
to put British
That is,
soldiers
he's loyal
in
to
your
the British
homes.
Empire.
That's the Quartering Act.
The next